The Unnoticed Quirk, written by Teriiphelia and read for you by Eleanor Elizabeth. Summary. After the attack on the USJ, Eraserhead wakes up in the hospital to his body being in a coma and the flickering form of his long-lost friend standing beside his bed. Stuck in the void between the living and the dead, what else can he do but check on his students? Imagine his surprise when he found out one of them could see him. This fic has a couple of trigger warnings, which will be on screen now. Shota didn't remember setting an alarm the night before. Actually, scratch that. He hasn't set an alarm once since he and Hazashi moved in together a decade ago. Who needs one when the person you live with loves to make breakfast while singing along with the radio, a little too loud for most people's liking? Not that he's about to stop him anytime soon. They got a soundproof apartment for a reason, and while Shota may not be a morning person, his husband's voice coming from the other side of their home makes early rising worthwhile. He and the pot of coffee he already prepared for them both when he arrives into the kitchen. The alarm kept going off next to his ear. It wasn't very loud per se, but that didn't mean it wasn't becoming annoying. He battered an arm tiredly to try and shut it off without looking, only to not be able to find anything next to him, not even his bedside table. Finally done with the sound, he abandoned the idea of going back to bed and opened his eyes to find the source of the offending noise. Not that the bright lights reflecting off the white walls let him keep them open for long, but his bedroom walls were fern green, not white. Startled by that fact, he tried to look around one more time. He was in a hospital room. He could see Hazashi sitting next to his bed, laying his head on the mattress with one hand on his leg. His hair was a mess, pulled into a bun that most likely hadn't been let down in a couple days. He couldn't help but frown at the sight. Hazashi loved to take care of his appearance, not just for his jobs, but because it made him feel good with himself. Whatever sent him to the hospital this time must have been really bad for the blonde to disregard his routine like this. Shota tried to pat his husband's head to let him know that he was there and fine, but his hand phased through the other man's skull. "What the hell?" he yelled while quickly removing his hand from Zashi's head, staring at it in horror until a painfully familiar voice caught his attention. "Quite shocking the first time it happens, right?" It sounded just like he remembered. Shota turned his head to find the origin of the voice in the form of Shirakumo Oboro, dressed in his hero costume, just like that awful day of work studies. If it weren't for the way that he seemed to flick in and out of existence, he would have said his friend was really there. But he couldn't be. He once held on to the thought that his death was really just an evil joke he was playing on everyone, and that he'd come back to them floating in on a cloud, a huge grin on his face, acting like nothing happened. But he never did. Before he could ask him anything, the door to the room was pried open, and in came Nemuri. She was out of costume, wearing a long purple sweater with a black wide belt that made it look like a dress, and with her hair pulled up into a high ponytail. "Zashi, it's been 3 days," she said sadly as she fully entered the room, closing the door behind her. "You need to at least eat something." Her friend didn't answer, just like he hadn't every time she'd come to visit. She was carrying a small bag that she put on the table by the window, pulling out a couple of packaged sandwiches and handing one over to her friend. "If you won't go out and eat, then you're going to eat here. Not the best meal, but at least you'll have something." "Thanks, Nem, but I'm not hungry," he said, not even lifting his head to look at her. "That lame excuse stopped working 2 days ago, hun. Now, you're going to eat this." She gripped the man's shoulder to pull him up and put a sandwich in his hand. "And do something other than mope all day." The last comment earned her a glare that could rival Shota's. She stared back into his reddish-green eyes, her hold on his shoulders tightening for a second. "Look, I know how you feel, and you know it. We've been in this situation more times than we like to think about. The staff here is surely done with seeing us on this ward of the hospital. But Shota is strong. You'll see how he'll be back with us in no time." As Hazashi took the offered food, Nemuri gave him a small smile, glad to see her friend trying. Shota was still staring at them, forgetting for a second that they didn't know he was awake for some reason. He was reminded about his current situation by a cold hand on his shoulder that had him turning around to face Oboro again. It was hard to tell what the boy was feeling with how he kept going between fully in the room and almost invisible. "What's happening?" he asked in his usual gruff tone. He had a lot of questions, but that one was a good summary for all of them. Oboro smiled at him. "You're always the straightforward one, aren't you?" The boy giggled. "For starters, you're in a coma show." he explained, pointing at the bed Shota was sitting on at the moment for the hero to see his unconscious and heavily bandaged body still lying on the bed under him. And then the memories of the attack hit him and made him growl. It must be really deep if your spirit is able to leave your body, but I heard the doctors talking about your case sometime after they finished settling you in here, and they were positive you would be waking up. They weren't sure when, though. So I'm practically dead, he deadpanned. The heart monitor that you tried to hit earlier tells me that you're not, Sho, he laughed. You're in what we like to call the void. Plenty of comatose people come here for a while, but not all of them have friends to spend the time with while they wait to wake up or join us fully. Unlike you. He slung an arm around Shota's shoulders. You can't do everything that I can here, but I'll make sure you don't get bored. That had the black-haired man frown in confusion. What can we do, exactly? We can phase through whatever we want, but I think we subconsciously stop ourselves from phasing through the floor or any place we try to sit on, hence why we can sit on the bed and not end up on the other side of the globe. I can freeze water if I stay close to it for a while, but spirits like you run warmer than ghosts like me, since you're still alive, so I doubt you can do that. Oh, and I can also mess with electronics. Pretty cool for pranks, but stings a lot, so don't do that often. He keeps rambling and muttering, but Shota can't make out what he's saying anymore. He had missed this a lot. Being able to hear Obero's voice, even if he couldn't always understand whatever had him so excited all the time. He always had the power to flood the atmosphere with happiness and enthusiasm wherever he went, much like Hazashi could if he wanted. However, before he could get too deep into the comfort of having Obero back, the boy hissed in pain, and he almost disappeared and made Shoto alert and vigilant. Obero, what's happening to you? He's hurting him again. A scream broke out from his throat, and then he was gone. Shota scanned the room to see if anything there could be the cause of his friend's sudden vanishing, but came empty-handed. Not knowing what to do to help, or even where to find Obero, Shota focused on Zashi and Nem, who were drinking coffee in small paper cups, whilst quietly discussing what was going on at the school after the USJ attack. Apparently Nezu had tried to convince the board once again to turn UA into a boarding school, which the principal had been suggesting for a couple of years after seeing many villains try to promote attacks against the hero schools, but it was always turned down because it wouldn't be sustainable. A shame that not even this had been enough for those stuck-up arseholes to approve it. It looked like in the few minutes he and Obero had been talking, Zashi had fixed his hair a bit, enough for it to stay up in a freshly done bun. He still looked like a mess, but that's not something that can be fixed until he wakes up for real. They've been in these kind of situations enough times for Shota to know that. He wanted to have a look around to check if Obero was somewhere else in the hospital, or to see if 13 was in another room, but he couldn't bring himself to leave Zashi's side. Hours ticked by, and Shota saw some of his colleagues come and go from his room, leaving flowers and checking on Hazashi, because, apparently, this was the first time since Shota was admitted to the hospital that they'd heard his voice. He'd have to thank them all once he could talk to them again. Even if they thought he couldn't hear them, they reassured him that 13 was discharged the day before and was recovering nicely, and that his class were all fine and would be returning to school the next day along with all the other students. The attack had been last Thursday, and Nezu had given all the courses Friday to rest and to up the school's security system, and informed him that his class hadn't been told about the severity of his current state. Even if they said the kids were okay, he wouldn't relax until he saw it for himself. The last visitor for the day was the principal, who came in sitting on Nemuri's shoulder. "How are you holding up, Yamada-kun?" His voice was missing its usual upbeat tone, but only those who had to deal with the Chimera on a daily basis would be able to notice. So everyone in the room did. "I'm as good as I can be, given the circumstances, sir." "Which is to say you're doing poorly, am I right?" The small creature hopped off from his ride and stood next to the sitting blonde, a paw on the man's knee. The man sighed, looking back at the occupied bed. "No use lying to you, is there?" The principal tried to talk Hizashi into going back to school the next day, claiming that Shota wouldn't want him to stay there wasting time with him when he could be helping others and taking care of himself. Shota wasn't even surprised the Rat Chimera knew him that well. He also promised that he would make sure Shota was well cared for and that he would bring Hazashi back to the hospital himself once the school day was over. Hazashi asked to be the one to inform Shota's class of the situation, saying they deserved to know what was going on with their sensei, and Nezu agreed to let him take the next day's homeroom period to bring the kids up to date, but to make sure they knew not to share it with anyone outside of their class, as to not cause panic amongst the students, or let the media catch wind of it, knowing Eraserhead wouldn't want it to get out. It was way past midnight when Oboro returned to Hizashi's side. He couldn't use Shota as an anchor for where to appear while the man was a spirit, and was surprised to find that he'd left Shota's room. But seeing as he was in Nemuri's apartment, he was inclined to believe that he'd been forced to leave the hospital. The blonde hero was sleeping in the guest room that Nemuri mostly used to store the free samples of midnight merch her agency gave her whenever they released something new that she hadn't had the chance to give away yet. He'd clearly been dragged here to get well rested and presentable for the students. The teen ghost let him be and wandered off to find Shota, knowing what he always looked for when he came to this place. Just like he thought, there the spirit was, trying to pet Nemuri's sleeping cat and glaring at his hand when it wouldn't let him feel the cat's soft coat. Hey, He was cut off by his friend jumping up from the couch and trapping him in a hug, which he quickly reciprocated because it's not every day that the stoic Aizawa Shota gives someone a hug, no matter how much he cares about them. "Where have you been?" he asked, letting go of the blue-haired boy just enough to look him in the eye. "Why did you scream before you disappeared? Are you okay?" "Do you really want to know, Sho?" The look on the hero's face was enough of an answer for Oboro, who, taking a deep breath, prepared himself for the hard conversation they were about to have. "I'm sure you remember work studies, and the building that killed me." Shota looked away from him, but gave him a small nod. "It wasn't supposed to crush me, but you." That got his friend to look back at him again, shock and what he was sure was guilt clear on his face. How do I know?" Another nod. "The man that took my body from under the rubble was complaining about how the villain had to get the Eraserhead Quirk kid, but that he'd find use for me anyway. I'm so glad he didn't get you, more so after seeing what that monster did to my body." "And you're still connected to it," Shota stated. "That's why your form keeps flickering, because your body is still working even if you died. And I imagine that you feel your body's pain." Now it was Oboro's turn to nod, to which Shota cursed. He's his own self at this point, even if he follows those bastards' orders. He failed his latest mission, and got punished for it. How did he fail? Shota had a really bad feeling about that question, but it came out of his mouth anyway. "Shigaraki isn't healing as fast as Sensei wants." "Please don't tell me." "Kurogiri." "God fucking damn it!" He laid back down on the couch, still muttering curses as Oboro moved to sit on the floor next to his head. "Look on the bright side. I've taken note of the location of each of their hideouts along the years. Now that you can hear me, I can give them to you, and you can use them to take down those assholes." He tried to be cheerful, so that Shota would stop beating himself up for not knowing about his fate. "That doesn't save you the torture you've already been through," the man said, glaring at the ceiling. "If it helps saving all the people that they will try to hurt in the future, it will have been worth it." They both fell quiet after that, the only sound being the scratching of a pen against paper as Nemuri was grading her students' assignments in the coffee table next to them. It was around 2 in the morning when she tidied up and left for her room, leaving the house completely silent. Shota got tired of the silence soon, though. "Have you been around us this whole time, Boro?" "Except for when I'm keeping an eye on those villains. Yes," he replied, his eyes closed as he leaned further into the couch. "You guys are my family, not to mention that Hizashi is literally my foster brother. Of course, I'd stick around to watch the amazing heroes and people you've become." Shota moved to look at the boy and committed to memory all the little things he'd forgotten about him along the years, like how his hair flowed in the air when he laughed, or the cut on the bridge of his nose that his goggles always left because of the mistake in the design that he always claimed he'd get fixed, but never did. They stayed there the rest of the night, talking about the past and all the great moments the rooftop gang had shared together. When the sun began to peek over the horizon, the two of them marched over to the balcony to watch the sunrise as sounds started to fill the morning with life. By the time Nemuri and Hizashi arrived at UA, Oboro had run out of topics to keep Shota from going crazy because of his paranoia. "Sho, I told you already. I saw your kids getting out of the USJ as they boarded you onto the ambulance. The worst they had were a few shallow cuts." "You haven't seen how some of them try to keep their injuries from training to themselves, afraid of asking for a pass to see the old lady. They can't be trusted to report when they're hurt." The man was pacing around the staff room, not bothering to avoid any of the furniture or heroes, since he didn't have to worry about bumping into them. "Sometimes I believe you like to make yourself suffer." When all the teachers started to gather their stuff and head for the first period of the day, Shota was the first one out the door, followed closely by Oboro. He didn't usually go with Shota to his homeroom classes. Seeing Hero Corps students brought bitter thoughts to his mind that he'd rather avoid, but the day of the attack he had a bad feeling and decided to visit the USJ. Once he saw the villains start to pour out of those damn familiar portals, he used his anger on Hisashi to get to the school fast and started messing with the lights and the electronics in the whole campus so that they'd know that something was wrong. It hurt, but better that than leaving Shota, 13, and those kids with people like Shigaraki with no backup. When that kid with the engines arrived, the teachers were already scouting the campus looking for a threat, so they were fast to assemble and go towards the facility. If only he kept a closer eye on Kurogiri lately. Maybe he would have found a way to prevent this. The ghost shook his head. There was no point wondering about what-ifs now. Both friends arrived at the classroom in no time, and Oboro couldn't help but hit Shota lightly on the arm when a relieved sigh escaped the man's mouth. "Told you." Shota glared at him for a moment before looking back to his class and studying them more closely. Most of them looked to be physically alright. Surely recovery girls work, but, of course, those who usually try to cover their injuries were still hurt. Shinzo had a poorly disguised bruise on his left cheek that didn't let him lean on that side of his face to nap while he waited for class to start. And Midoriya had bandages peeking from under his uniform sleeves while muttering and writing away in his notebook as if the rest of the world didn't exist. Bandages that were slowly turning red. "Where did you get those wounds, problem child?" he asked, more to himself than to the kid. He wasn't prepared for said problem child to literally jump in his seat, eyes wide and looking at him. How was he looking at him? "Aizawa-sensei!" he exclaimed, unaware of the looks he was getting from most of his classmates. It looked like Ida wanted to say something, but the door to the classroom opening with Ectoplasm and Present Mike entering distracted him. While Shota turned to look at the heroes, Oboro had walked closer to the green-haired kid to have a staring contest with him, a big grin showing on the ghost's face. He was thriving at the prospect of having a new person to talk to. He would have come to this class sooner if he knew someone there could see him. "Good morning, little listeners. I'm glad to see you're all doing okay. Eraserhead will be really glad to see you rocking when he gets back." Hisashi tried to slip into his present Mike persona to try and convince himself and the kids that everything was alright. He noticed how Midoriya looked at him confused, but didn't dwell on it. "Until he does, though, Ectoplasm here will be your substitute teacher." He paused to see if any of the kids wanted to say something, and sure enough, Ida shot up from his seat, raising an arm. "Sir, excuse me, but could you tell us about Aizawa-sensei's condition? Nobody we have asked wanted to tell us anything, and we're worried for him." He was doing the chopping motions with his arms as he talked. "He didn't look very good when they got him out of the USJ, Kuro," Asui chimed in. "He will recover, right? That monster bashed his head in the ground with enough force to crack the concrete." Kirishima got a slap on his shoulder by Ashido when the comment made Midoriya, Asui, Kaminari, and Shinzo flinch at the memory. Even Hisashi would rather not remember that part. He sighed. "I got permission to tell you everything on one condition. You can't share it with anyone else outside of this classroom. The school doesn't want to cause a panic or let the details reach the media. You dig?" After so many energetic nods and multiple promises of being tight-lipped about everything, he started. "As of right now, Eraserhead is in a comatose state caused by the head trauma he suffered during the attack at the USJ." All the students looked at him in shock, disbelief, and sadness, and he was trying with all of his might not to cry in front of them. "He's healing steadily, and the doctors treating him are sure he'll wake up. They estimate it might take a few weeks." Most of the kids were letting out silent tears and muffled sobs. The others looked too shocked to react, and Bakugo was seething. "If I catch that beaked freak, I'm going to explode him into next year," he grumbled. Hisashi agreed with that sentiment. All in all, the school day went on like normal, if you don't take into account how his class looked less lively than usual, with the kids working hard in their lessons and giving their all in sparring matches that All Might had them do in foundational heroics. Shota stood to the side, finally having a chance to see for himself how the number one hero taught his kids. Sparring wasn't the man's original plan, though. His first idea was to have rescue training, but making some of them play the villains of the exercise, which was just no. At least he was capable of reading the room after he revealed his lesson plan. Now he just needed to be capable of teaching his kids without traumatizing them further. Seeing how that buffoon didn't even know how to correct their stances when they didn't get the moves right told him that was a far-fetched idea, but a man could dream. Midoriya kept looking his way throughout the day, and also looking around when nobody paid attention, most likely looking for Oboro, but the ghost had left to keep an eye on Zashi after he left the 1A classroom that morning. Something good about his current situation was that he can see for himself how this year's batch of his homeroom do academically in their classes. Some of his findings are worrying, like how Kaminari presents symptoms for ADHD, how Bakugo has issues hearing what others say if they don't speak loudly, how Shinzo only asks questions as statements, how Midoriya takes twice as long to write down class-related notes because he keeps making multiple copies of them during the lecture. Why would he need so many notes about the same topics? And how the last two avoid most of their classmates and look uncomfortable when they're too close. Shinzo only relaxes when it's Midoriya near him, while Midoriya is the same, but with Shinzo and Bakugo. He will have to address all of it when he gets back to his body. For now, all he can do is watch, because Shota sure wasn't involving Midoriya only for the message to reach the kids faster. Even if he is an extremely polite kid, his classmate struggles are none of his business. Nothing stops him from helping Midoriya now, though. The kid can see and hear him after all, something that he's been trying to find the reason for all day, with no results whatsoever. Once the kids went back to their classroom at the end of the day to pick up their bags and go home, he waited so that he could get the boy alone. Oboro joined him for a moment to tell him that he'd seen Zashi get into the rat's car to go back to the hospital. He was gone just in time to see Midoriya asking Bakugo to wait for him outside. When the door closed behind the blonde, the kid looked at Shota, wringing his hands. Another thing Shota had noticed the kid did when speaking to his teachers. Are you really here now, Aizawa-sensei? He didn't like how anxious the boy looked all the time. I am. Do you have any theories as to why you are the only person who can see me? What about that other kid who was with you this morning? He asked, tilting his head. Is he a student here too? He looked like he was wearing a hero costume. He seemed to disappear sometimes. Is his quirk something related to teleporting? Or is it invisibility like Hagakure? Shota grimaced slightly. He was a UA student a long time ago. He was a friend of mine from my own high school years. You could pinpoint the exact moment that Midoriya connected the dots. If he was a student at the same time as you were, then he should be an adult, but he doesn't look much older than me, and I haven't heard from any pro in the last 10 years that dresses like that. Wait, if he was a friend, does that mean he's dead? But if he's dead, then how can he be here? And if he was with you, does that mean that you're dead too? But Mike-sensei said... The problem child was working himself up into an anxiety attack. Slow down, please. Shota didn't know what to do. He was stuck with only using words to try and calm down the kid since he couldn't touch him. Kid, look at me. I need you to breathe in for 4 seconds, hold it for another 4, and then release it slowly for another 4. Keep doing that until you feel your breathing has gone back to normal. Use your mouth if you feel like your nose is blocked. Can you do that? Midoriya nodded and tried to follow the instructions. After a few minutes, he was breathing normally again, though his hands were shaking a bit. Aizawa-sensei, please tell me you're not dead, the boy pleaded, his eyes shimmering with unshed tears. I'm not, Midoriya. You hellspawn aren't going to get out of my lessons that easy. That got a wet snort from the kid, which Shota was grateful for. Midoriya reminded him a lot of Oboro. Seeing him sad felt wrong. Present Mike is right. I'm in a coma, sure, but I'm still very much alive. Then why were you with someone who's dead? Shota repeated the explanation that Oboro gave him the day before about the void and the differences between a spirit and a ghost. The kid even took out a notebook and pen from who knows where and started writing down everything Shota said. When he was done, he realised that the kid should be getting home like all the other students, but something didn't feel right about sending the kid on his way. It's getting late, problem child. The kid deflated, all enthusiasm gone, and the off feeling intensified in his gut. Isn't Bakugo waiting for you? Oh, right! Kachan's still outside! He put the notebook away and held the straps of his backpack as he walked forward towards the door. He stopped at the threshold and looked back at his homeroom teacher. I'll see you tomorrow, Aizawa-sensei! I'll be here. Don't worry. The kid shot him a tiny smile and left. Shota still followed him until they arrived at the building's entrance, from where he could see how Bakugo's tense shoulders relaxed when he saw the shorter boy break into a sprint towards him. What took you so long, nerd? I was talking to a teacher. Do I have to beat someone up? The blonde cracked his knuckles and they started to head towards the campus gate. If someone's giving you crap here like happened in Aldera, I'll deal with them. You know it. Shota perked up at that. Was Midoriya having issues with bullying at the school? No, everyone here is really nice, Karchan. Please don't get into trouble because of me. Shota didn't follow them for long. He reached out for Hizashi like Oboro taught him and disappeared. He still had a really bad feeling about the problem child. Karchan insisted on walking him home, letting him know that he was welcome at his house if he wanted to avoid Inko like he'd done sometimes before. Izuku really appreciated it, but he couldn't take him up on that offer again after the last time the woman caught him sneaking into the house late at night or not showing up for a day. His talk with Aizawa-sensei had put him at ease. The man's voice had the power to make him feel safe, and its effect increased ever since he risked his life for them during the attack, but it also made him run late. He could only hope Inko didn't notice. Since the woman didn't, and couldn't, know about Izuku passing UA's entrance exam and making it into the hero course, thanks to his training with Karchan, only Aunt Mitsuki and Uncle Masuro worried over them when the school called to inform the families about it. If the school had an issue with his contact information being the same as Karchan's, they didn't say anything. A part of Izuku was hoping they'd look into it and see Inko for what she really was. If people thought Karchan had anger management problems, then they should see her at the house. While another part of him didn't want it to get out because, while Inko was bad, who knows if the place he'd been sent to would change anything. No, better the devil you know. When he arrives to his apartment building and convinces Karchan he'll be fine, he quickly pulls a dark, oversized hoodie from his backpack to hide the uniform's blazer under as he starts the short trek upstairs to his apartment door. He stopped calling the place home years ago, when his father left. Thinking about it, while Inko told him Hizashi died, he could still see him. Since today he's seen someone he knows is dead. Maybe his father really was dead back then too, and what he saw was his ghost? That might be why Inko called him crazy and hit him whenever he said he'd talk to him. If that was the case, the man could have said something sooner. He would have avoided so many of her explosive breakdowns that way. He didn't want to think too much about all the times he might have seen people nobody else could see. What Aizawa-sensei told him about the void was really interesting though. Opening the door to the apartment, his keys slipped from his grasp. He bent down to pick them up, just in time to not be hit in the head by a pretty thick book that Inko must have thrown with her quirk. "Why are you late, you useless brat?" she yelled, more ammunition ready to be sent his way in the form of books and pots of plants floating beside her. "Aldera let out an hour ago. Your school isn't so far away that it should take you this long to get back." He involuntarily flinched at the loud voice. Why did it affect him so much? He grew up with Karchan's explosions going off around him all the time. Her yelling should be nothing next to them. He was too nervous to think of a good excuse. "The middle school students leave earlier than the high school ones, Mother. If anything, it would be the opposite, but maybe she doesn't know that. Classes finish half an hour later for me now." Izuku wasn't sure she'd bought it, but at least she deactivated her quirk. He'd take the small victories when he could get them. "I gotta leave for my shift. Clean this mess while I'm gone. Be of use for something, you brat." She almost knocked him over when she pushed past him on her way out, slamming the door closed behind her. Izuku released a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding when he heard the clack of her heels get quieter with distance and went up to his room to change into more comfortable clothes. As he took off the hoodie and the blazer, he saw the bandages on his arm. That he had replaced before and after training. You can never be too cautious when it comes to keeping wounds cleaned. It dawned on him how lucky he'd been not to get hit by his mother's attack when she arrived. Aizawa-sensei had noticed this one that he got from a shard from a ceramic figurine that Inko hit him with that morning. Izuku knows it's just a matter of time before he can't brush off any more questions. Using training as an excuse for his injuries will get old rather soon. When he was in some loose clothes, he went back into the living room to see the mess of broken pots, strewn soil and scattered books that Inko left for him to clear from the carpet. He did what he could without access to cleaning supplies, that she didn't bother to restock since she always made him do the cleaning and never let him ask for anything. Until he deemed it to look as good as it would get, he even took out the trash bags containing the broken pots to make sure Inko wouldn't try to use them against him later. He knew from experience that that's something she would do. He locked himself in his room to start his homework, a smaller amount than usual. He supposed that was because the teachers wanted to give them a little bit of a break after the USJ. Izuku smiled thinking about it, and about how kind and understanding all their teachers had been today. It was the first time he had teachers that worried about their students. It was nice not dreading to go to school. Later that night, when Inko got back drunk and frustrated and found her son in the kitchen as an easy target, the boy wasn't as excited to go to class the next day, not with the black eye he was sporting thanks to her. As he sat in his room, muttering what he had researched about makeup tricks to cover up his shame, he didn't notice the angry shadow of a man that looked at him with sorrow, only to fade away into the nightly shadows. It was time he did something about this. Now he had a chance. No matter how much anyone tried, there was no getting Zashi out of the hospital room that night. Shota was glad he at least didn't look as depressed as he did when he first woke up as a spirit. The blonde was doing paperwork and humming to the radio he listened to through his headphones, as not to disturb anyone in the hospital until visiting hours were done, when he picked a couple of sandwiches up from the vending machine in the corridor and called it a night. Shota was just glad that his husband would get some sleep. According to Oboro, he didn't get any the first days he was here with him. The next day, both Ghost and Spirit left for UA as soon as Hazashi woke up. Shota wanted to check his student files like he did every second week of the school year, when he still had a homeroom class to teach, but he needed Oboro's help for that while he was in this state. Ghost could interact with small items. Spirits couldn't interfere with anything in the real world at all. And the sooner they went, the more he could read before Zashi and then the kids arrived. Thankfully, the archive room was always empty. Since he didn't mind sitting on the floor to go over the reports about his kids, he didn't need for Oboro to carry them anywhere and risk freaking out any teachers with a pile of floating documents down the hallways, if he could even carry that many at once. Most of his students had really normal files, average or a bit above average grades, recommendations from their teachers for their good behaviour and how ready to help they always were. They were listed in nuclear families, except for a few who lived with extended families and had really long lists of emergency contacts, like Ojiro, or lived with other relatives that weren't their parents, like Sato living with his grandmother. Ashido was the only one who was scratching at a passing grade, but her teachers praised her dedication to learning, claiming that she just needed to focus a bit more in class, and that she would pay more attention to immersive lessons rather than a drawn-out lecture. And then there were the problem children. Kaminari had lived most of his life in Georgia in the United States and had moved into his aunt's home in Japan at the start of UA. He wasn't listed as having any behavioural disorders, but his last homeroom teacher was suggesting he be evaluated by a therapist when he arrived to Japan on his notes in the kid's last academic report. Shinzo had attended 7 different schools until his parents ultimately had him homeschooled due to bullying from other kids and harassment from the teachers. His parents had noted how his last school tried to muzzle him, and that's why he was enrolled in an online school coming in the last 2 years of middle high. Bakugo was praised by every adult who worked in the school he attended, every recommendation using almost the same words, and they could all be summed up as, he has a powerful quirk. Not even one mention of how he seems to have issues with his hearing, except for a small notation from his school's quirk counsellor, who marked his hearing loss as a minor issue. But his teachers also talked about how he seemed to be hanging with a bad kid who was only dragging him down and forcing him to fight with his peers. Shota calls bullshit. The kid seems perfectly capable of starting a fight all on his own from what he's seen in the first week of classes. And Midoriya just gave him the impression of having had his file switched with someone else's. The same teachers who praised Bakugo painted the shyest kid he's ever met as a troublemaker and a disruption for his classmates, only because he's quirkless. Something Shota isn't so sure about after what happened the day before. His grades were a bit below average when his classwork at UA proves that he loves to learn the material, and every note on his report called him a jealous child that didn't bother turning in his homework and instigated fights against the quirk kids and trying to drag a promising student down with him. Once again, Shota called bullshit. Nezu has an excellent program that checks all the applicants' backgrounds and only lets them go through if they have no plausible black marks in their records. Since Midoriya was approved for the entrance exam with no relatives in high places, it's obvious the program didn't buy what those teachers tried to sell them. When he was back in his body, he was so taking this to Nezu. The rat is going to light up like a Christmas tree when Shota gives him reasons to burn down a few awful educational institutions. He also noticed how Bakugo and Midoriya both had the blonde's parents listed as emergency contacts, even though Midoriya was noted as only living with his mother after his father passed away when the kid was 6. The bad feeling from the day before came back to him. Before any of them knew it, the first period bell went off. The ghost put all the files back in its place and left for the 1A classroom, arriving just in time to see Ectoplasm closing the door behind him on his way inside. As Shota and Oboro came in through the wall, the black-haired man saw his problem child's shoulders untense in relief when the boy made eye contact with them. Why did the kid have a disguised black eye? Shooting them a small smile before tuning into the homeroom announcements. When Ectoplasm was done talking, Oboro made his way to the kid, while Shota moved to stand at the back of the class, where he could keep an eye on all of his kids without bothering Midoriya during the lessons. All throughout the day, the problem child seemed especially nervous. He wouldn't stop looking around every now and then would jump at every sound. It was worse than what Shota had noticed the day before. He tried to talk to the kid during breaks between classes, but every time he asked if he was okay, the boy would shut down until the next teacher came in. When he saw Midoriya was distracted during training, he'd had enough, and all but demanded the kid ask All Might for a break so they could talk. The kid was hugging himself as he walked beside Shota towards the wall where the students left their gym bags, digging his nails into his flesh enough to leave moon-like marks but not break the skin. And the man really wished he could pry the boy's hands away from his upper arms in that moment. He was hurting himself just because a teacher wanted to talk to him in private, never mind that he just didn't want the other kids to look at Midoriya as he seemingly talked to the air. "What has you so diverted today, problem child?" he asked bluntly. "It's obvious something is bothering you, and I can't help you if I don't know what's wrong." Not for the first time since he became his teacher, the kid looked at him as if he talked in another language, not understanding that he wanted to help him. And didn't that break his heart now that he knew part of how his past teachers treated him? And that's what hurt the most, that he didn't know the full extent of what his problem child went through. Shota put his hands next to Midoriya's, trying to get the message across. The kid glanced down, his eyes widened before he suddenly lowered his hands and kept his head down as he answered. I'm sorry, Aizawa-sensei. I've just had a strange feeling all day, like someone was following me," he said, almost whispering. "At first, I thought it could be you or your friend, but I didn't see you until homeroom started." "Have you felt like this ever since you entered the school?" The kid nodded. "Do you feel like that now?" The kid hesitated for a couple of seconds, then nodded. Shota tensed, looking around himself. Just for a moment, he thought he'd seen something move in the corner opposite from them, but that spot was under a blown-out bulb and notably darker than the rest of the gym for that distance. It was most probably the shadow cast by one of his students while they trained. Shota wondered if his own bad feeling that hadn't left him alone since that morning could be related to this. "I'm getting you home after classes are over." He raised an arm when he saw the kid opening his mouth to fight it. "No arguing, problem child. I don't have much to do right now anyway." Except watch Hisashi be MS over him, and it hurts too much to see his husband like that because of him. It was to try to keep the kid calm, and for his own peace of mind more than anything. When classes were over and the kids sent to the changing rooms, Shota lingered for a bit to check out the gym once more before going to stand next to the changing room's door. Midoriya was the first one out, followed closely by Bakugo. It seemed like the two had a silent conversation with their eyes that ended when the explosive blonde huffed and turned to leave. On their walk to the gates, they were briefly joined by Oboro, who told, more like whispered so the greenhead wouldn't hear him, Shota about what Hisashi had been doing while he was with his kids. Nezu was planning to hold the traditional meeting to discuss their first impressions of the first years and to get together their observations and plan according to any needs they have noticed their kids might have. That's where Shota's notes on his students should be shared, where he would make sure his kids got the help they need. He felt like he was failing them. Again. Then he realized something. "I can't do shit in that meeting, but you could," he told his friend. "You'd have to pick up some files that I checked this morning and leave them in my desk. I'd say to leave them on Zashi's, but I'd prefer to make him think that I wanted to investigate them further before the attack. His desk is next to mine. He'll see them anyway." "Cool. Run me by the files I gotta grab, Sho." Ashiro, Kaminari, Bakugo, Midoriya, and Shinzo. Class numbers 2, 7, 17, 18, and 19, he numbered. "Once Zashi comes to the staff room, try to make him look at them. I'll be damned if I let those kids go without the attention they need, just because I'm stuck like this." When Oboro went back to the archive room, they had almost left the school's grounds. The kid looked as anxious as ever, and Shota was vigilant and keeping close to the problem child all the way to the boy's apartment. It wasn't until Midoriya went to change, and Shota was about to leave, that he discovered who was responsible for his kid's uneasiness, in the form of a man coming out of the shadows in the unlit living room. The figure getting closer to him looked strangely familiar now that he wasn't hiding from view. It seemed to be a man in his early 30s, with short and curly golden hair. His eyes were a dark shade of orange, and they were staring at him with determination, like the man was someone on a mission. "Finally, I thought I'd never catch you alone." The man sighed and closed in to whisper to Shota, "I need your help. Well, more like he needs your help." He was pointing to the corridor Midoriya had walked through only a couple of minutes ago. "Who are you, and how do you know the kid?" he demanded. "I'd be ashamed of myself if I didn't know my own son, even if I've been dead for almost a decade," the other man said. "My name's Midoriya Hisashi." "So you're the one who's been following Midoriya today. Why?" "To talk to you. But I'm not sure that he'd be too happy to see me again, so I've had to wait until you weren't next to him." At Shota's stare, Midoriya Sr. elaborated. "Izuku was able to see me back when I just died. I came home from a villain attack I was a casualty of, not even noticing I'd left my body behind." None of the not really there men noticed how the green-haired boy had made it back from his room. "When I got back, Inko had just gotten the news of my passing on the phone and was telling Izuku. He told her that I was next to her. We still talked for some time. That's how I learnt that I was dead. But after a while, Inko got aggressive with Izuku whenever he mentioned he'd talked to me." "So you left me?" Izuku interjected, surprising both adults. "You thought that Mother would stop hurting me if I didn't see you again." The kid had tears in his eyes. "If I had known that she would treat you so badly regardless, I wouldn't have left it alone for so long. But now I can do something to help you, Izuku, and I'm going to take the chance." Both father and son were openly crying now, with the ghost trying to run his hand through his kid's hair. Shota didn't really know what to do in that moment, going over what he'd just learned. Midoriya's mother was abusive, and had been for as long as they both had lived alone. He was right to have a bad feeling about sending the problem child home the day before, and he was right to doubt about all the kid's injuries coming from training. He was not going to let it stand any longer. "Midoriya, pack your essentials." The kid made a confused noise that had his father trying to muffle a laugh. "This place is not safe for you. I'm not going to let you stay here and get hurt. Hurry, so we can leave before your mother comes back." At the reminder of the woman still to return, Midoriya sprinted back to his room and put his spare uniform and the few clothes he had in his closet into his school backpack. Shota is not going to dwell on how that was all he owned and he still had space inside the bag. Then he grabbed a really worn-out toothbrush from the bathroom and moved back to the living room. "Now what, Sensei?" Shota knew just who was going to love to have the kid around. "Follow me." Hisashi didn't want to stay for the meeting. He wanted to go back to the hospital and to check in with the doctors about Shota's condition. But his homeroom class needed him here. Shota's too. And he was sure his husband would prefer he made sure the students he was worried about were taken care of, rather than stay in the man's hospital room all afternoon. He found some of the student files on Shota's desk when he went to get his messenger bag from the staff room. And he wasn't surprised to find sticky notes with the man's speculations and concerns on each kid stuck to the inside of the student's file folder. He can say that he was worried about Shinzo and Midoriya too. He couldn't call himself a teacher if he didn't notice when his students were hurt, but he's not proud to admit the others had escaped him. Though he could suppose it's not surprising that he didn't notice Bakugo's hearing problems, when his hero persona is known for being loud, and he lives up to his reputation during his lectures. In the end, the meeting went on for a good 3 hours. Plans were set up to help the students who had educational needs, and Nezu was already typing away at his computer to look into the concerningly long list of schools that had ever wronged any of their new students. Things like that made him really glad to be on the principal's good side. When he arrived home to change out of his hero costume and go visit Shota, it was to find Midoriya, Shota's #1 problem child, as he calls him since the show he and Bakugo made of All Might's first time teaching, sitting on the floor and leaning against the home's door sleeping. He was still in his school uniform. Makeup that had covered his black eye, that he noticed either way, even if it was well hidden, during the day was now ruined and there were tear tracks on the kid's cheeks. "Hey, Midoriya," he whispered, crouching next to the kid but not touching him yet. "Little listener, time to wake up, kid." The boy started opening his eyes, still a bit out of it after the nap he had on the floor. As soon as he was fully awake, he jumped off the floor and took a step back, bowing his head. I'm really sorry for bothering you, Yamada-sensei. I know you'd prefer to visit Aizawa-sensei than deal with me, but I couldn't stay at my mother's house, and I didn't know where to go, and he told me to come here and tell you everything, and you wouldn't mind helping me, but I wasn't...
Please, slow down, kiddo, Hisashi exclaimed, not liking how Midoriya immediately shut up and looked at him with wide eyes. I can't understand you if you go so fast, little listener. How about you start at how you found my place when we get inside, and we can go from there? He asked as he got the key ready to open the door. The kid nodded, still not looking away from him with that fearful expression that had Hisashi's gut twisting, but he didn't start talking until they were both sitting on the couch, after Midoriya turned down having anything to drink. So, how'd you get here, kiddo? I don't think any of the teachers gave their addresses to you students. Midoriya took a deep breath and at last looked away from his English teacher. Aizawa-sensei brought me here. He said you could help me. If it weren't for the fact that he knew Midoriya wasn't one to pull pranks or make dark jokes, Hisashi would have told the kid off and sent him home. But this is Midoriya, the shyest kid of all the first-year classes, a kid who's more likely to keep quiet than risk offending someone. As it is, he was more shocked than mad. Could you explain further? Last I know, Aizawa's still in the hospital, Midoriya. The kid looked to the side for a few seconds, then back at the floor. I can see people in the void between life and death. We believe that's my quirk, because I've been able to do that since I was at least 6, but they look normal to me, so I can't differentiate between them and common people. Aizawa-sensei says he woke up on it 3 days after the attack and has been following you to... I'm not going to say that, sensei. He looked scandalized at the same spot he did before. Say what, little listener? Aizawa-sensei says he's been following you to, and these are his words, make sure you take fucking care of yourself instead of mope over him, because it's not worth it to waste time next to a sleeping man when there's people who need you more. Hisashi couldn't help himself. He laughed as loud as he could without using his quirk, startling the green head in the process. That sounds like Shota, all right. He shot the boy a smile, loving when he got a small one in return. He calmed down as soon as he could and motioned Midoriya to go on, unaware of the smiles on his late friend and husband's faces. The kid pulled a notebook out from somewhere and handed it to him. Everything that Aizawa-sensei explained to me about the void is in here, along with some theories about my quirk that I wrote while I was on the train here, but Sensei's asking me to tell you to leave it for later and talk about why I need help. He looked where Hisashi assumed he was seeing Shota was. Sorry, Sensei. The more Hisashi heard about that woman's treatment of her son, the more he wanted to storm towards the Midoriya's apartment and give her a quirked piece of his mind. But what example would that set for his student if he abused his power as a hero in the name of revenge? He took a deep breath and sent Izuku, the kid told him he didn't feel comfortable being referred to by his last name, to set himself into the guest room while he took care of everything. The blonde pulled out his phone the second he heard the green-haired teen close the bedroom door behind him, and started calling Shota's nighttime colleague. Detective Tsukashi speaking. The other man picked up on the first ring. This is Present Mike. I need your help on a case regarding one of my students. The hero spoke, trying with no success to keep his anger from showing in his voice. Once Shota had seen that Zashi had the situation handled with the detective and was getting their boss in on everything, he went after the kid while Oboro chose to stay with his brother in the living room. He was sure that letting out everything that he'd been hiding for years, reuniting with his dad after so long, and realizing something that he thought he knew about himself wasn't true, had taken a lot out of the boy. Sure enough, when he entered the room, and he will never get used to not needing and being unable to open doors, he could see a shaking teen-sized lump under the covers of the bed, with a ghost sitting beside it. And it was only his trained ear that let him catch onto the muffled sobs coming from the problem child. It's okay, Izuku. I promise I won't ever leave you ever again unless you want me to. And even then, I will always come back if you ask me. The man tried to console his son. But we don't know what the place I'll be sent to will be like, or if I'll keep being able to attend you, The kid sniffled and then peeked out just a little bit from under the covers. Is it wrong that I want to stay here, Papa? He said in a whisper. They're the first adults to be so nice to me in so long. Even not Mitsuki is mean to me sometimes when I come over, and I know that she's just that way with everyone, but it still hurts, and Uncle Masaru doesn't talk to me much. Shota found that a good moment to speak up. The plan wasn't to send you anywhere, problem child. He didn't enjoy watching both ghost and teenager jump up from fright and shut up. If you're willing, I was going to ask Zashi what he thought about taking you in. I'm sure he will beg me as soon as he can talk to me again. There's the snort that proved that he succeeded in cheering up the child, something Mr. Midoriya liked, judging by the smile he sported on his face. Izuku soon made known that he was very willing and was quick to jump up from the bed and bow repeatedly while thanking him. It wasn't much later when the tiredness caught up to him and he fell under. The boy's father was able to move the bedsheets enough to cover the boy up to his waist. The ghost soon directed his gaze towards him. You know I'll stay around, right? For Izuku's sake, I hope you do. It didn't take longer than 3 days to have Midoriya Inko in jail for good, Tsukashi's quirk being a godsend for any case the man worked on. With Izuku now out of that abusive environment and all the kids in his class getting all the help they needed, Shota found himself with nothing to do but follow Oboro on his pranks. He had to admit, it was really funny to scare unassuming colleagues, especially a certain blonde that still didn't know how to teach a class, nor deal with teenagers in general. Seriously, why did Nezu hire him without having any experience in teaching? And a certain support hero that would blame any and all loud sounds on Hatsume, that didn't seem to pay her teacher any mind while she was working. But he could see how restless Hazashi was getting. His husband had started bringing Izuku to visit him in the hospital if the kid wanted to tag along with him, which he started doing the second he was asked, after being assured that he wouldn't be intruding into anything. No matter how much the blonde hero tried to hide it, Shota could see right through his facade. He wanted him back just as much, if not even more, as Shota himself wanted to return to his body. It was a Thursday, exactly 2 weeks after the USJ attack, that he was watching over his kids and his husband during 1A's English class when his body started flickering, much like Oboro's did when Kurogiri was close to All for One, his doctor, or Shigaraki. Something they found out after they saw his body was staying in the same place for a long time, and he went to check on his reanimated body. Izuku! He yelled, for once not caring if he was in the middle of a class. Knowing Hazashi, he would dismiss the kids early, since it was their last class of the day. I think it's time. The kid looked back at him with a wide smile and nodded, watching Shota fade into the air. He rapidly turned to his loud teacher and stood up. They had talked about this possibility beforehand. If Shota was to start waking up while they were at school, Izuku had permission from Nezu to go find Hazashi, and if they were together, the principal would handle the rest of 1A. Of course, they had just crossed the classroom's threshold when they heard a metallic noise and the Chimera's overly excited tone coming from inside. Due to an emergency, I'll be covering the rest of your lecture. How about we make this interesting? Hazashi felt sorry for the kids. He thought that when he left the classroom, he would close his eyes and open them already back out of the void, but he was wrong. Sure, he was in his hospital room, but he was still just a spirit watching in. He kept flickering and gaining his sense of touch back as he felt the cast in his hands, feeling disoriented when he started sensing his body's laying position while he was standing. Little by little, his body's senses overrode his spirits. It got to a point where he just imitated his body's position the same way he came into the void, to escape the feeling of wrong that came over him. He laid there, lifting his arm over his head from time to time to check if it was fading and coming back, or if it was the bandaged version of it. He never thought he'd like to see himself covered in bandages. In the end, it took far longer than they had anticipated, and Izuku and Hazashi had made it to his side a while ago, but he believed that by the 50th time that he lifted his arm to look at it, it had changed at last. And it hurt. He incorporated himself, wincing from the effort to move his stiff and still not entirely healed muscles and joints, and found 2 teary faces looking at him. But he knew that there was one more next to them. His husband was vibrating and making a huge effort not to jump at him that very moment. He both loathed and appreciated it. Why don't you all get over here? We get our immediate need of affection and sign a certain document that I know you brought with you, Zashi, and see about getting my wounds taken care of, please. He basked in the tender and warm, and a bit of cold on his left arm that he wasn't prepared for, even if he knew it was coming. The embrace he was trapped in by his family. It was good to be back. Hey guys, it's Ella, and I'm hoping that you are all having a lovely day today. Hopefully you liked the video. This one was definitely a doozy. I've basically been making this for the whole month of October, but it's finally done, and you will have listened to it by this point, so let me know in the comments what you thought of it. I love chatting to you guys in there. Be sure to like the video to boost my serotonin levels. And subscribe if you want to know whenever I make new videos. So until I see you again, be sure to practice some self-care, drink all of that water, don't skip breakfast, and get the appropriate amount of sleep. Yes, this is a threat. And I will catch you laters.